Hey there, it's Olivia Savannah here from Olivia's Catastrophe, and today I'm here to talk about my favourite books I read while studying my degree. So I studied English literature and creative writing, and I've recently finished all of the coursework needed for my degree, so I'm just waiting on results now, which will come in June. And when I asked you for some video suggestions, Priscilla recommended a video which has to do with all of the books that I really enjoyed reading for university, and I thought what a better way to summarise my degree than by doing this video now. So I'm here to show you some of my favourite books, my favourite reads, and I'll be running through some of my subjects. We're mostly going to be focusing on the English literature side than the creative writing side because I had more assigned reading for English literature. We take it to first year, and in first year I did a course which was called World Literature, and it was just about reading books from all around the world, but quite a few of these fell into UK, Ireland and Scotland. And one of the ones that I really enjoyed reading at long last, because I'd intended to read it for ages, was Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, and this one is a classic that is well known. It's about Victor Frankenstein, who is a scientist, and he creates a monster out of dead human parts, but mostly it's less about the creation of the monster and more about perceptions of beauty and philosophy around the creation of life and what should be done afterwards, responsibility and human kindness. And I really liked this book. I really liked all of the philosophical discussions. There are some parts which have to do with nature, and I liked how it was about human nature and then also physical nature. That duality worked very, very well for me. I thought it was a fascinating novel to analyse and study, and I'm so glad we read it in first year. It's one of my favourite classics of all time, and also I'm writing a retelling of it at the moment. We also studied a play, I believe, for that same course, and it was Endgame by Samuel Beckett. Now, I'd encountered Samuel Beckett before in secondary school because we also did a section that was on plays for the IB. But I was really glad to go into Samuel Beckett having read some of him before, because he does take getting used to, because his plays are quite nonsense based, but there is meaning within that nonsense, and Endgame is quite the same. So in this one we're following a wheelchair user who is sitting in this room, and he is served and cared for by a servant who is also disabled, I believe, and it's just about them in that enclosed space in this room, waiting for something to happen, waiting for a shift in their dynamic, constantly waiting for the end game. But it's all about this waiting, this longing for things to happen, the outside space and the inside space, and some of the dynamics that they have. The way that Samuel Beckett touches on the futility of life and the repetitions in life, and manages to do that while not making the play repetitious in and of itself, is very interesting. And I also like how much character action is geared and very much focused on in the play, just as much as the characters' dialogue. Very interesting use of space, and I really enjoyed this play. And I also recommend Waiting for Godot, which I think is a superior play, but I really enjoyed both of these equally. Another one that we read for that same course was The Hour of the Star by Clarice Lispector, and just like Endgame, this is also a translated novel. It's very short, so I would say a novella. It's about this poor girl who lives in the slums of Rio, and she's just trying to be happy, and it's about her experience just trying to be happy. However, we never get to hear from her own point of view. We hear from this man who is rich, who is wealthy, and who sees her on the street. And I thought it was such an interesting narrative focus, because we see that this girl is too poor, too downtrodden, too low class to even tell her own story. And the contrast of the person who's telling the narration and his mind compared to what she is truly experiencing is so stark and obvious and almost painful to see it be told in this way that it captivated me completely. I really think Frankenstein and this play both focus on themes of identity, and especially responsibility in the creation of identity, as both of these characters don't get to be the focus of their own story, to be the memorable figure of this own story. In this one it's the man who gets narration, and in Frankenstein it's the scientist. And I wrote an essay in that year comparing those two, and I found it to be one of my favourite essays, even though I could probably rewrite it longer and better now that all of these years have passed. And then one other book that I really liked in the first year was The Word for World is Forest by Ursula K. Le Guin, and it was the first K. Le Guin that I read, and sadly we read it just as she was passing away, for Modes of Reading, which is the only literature theory class that I did, because I'm not a big fan of literature theory. and in this one we follow this world that is, you know, very nature-based, very in tune with nature, and there is a native species on the planet, but the humans come and they colonize this planet, and it's like how they are colonizing the native species already there and what they are doing to the natural environment of this world. It's a very interesting eco-science fiction novel, and I enjoyed studying the environmental aspect of the science fiction, and I definitely want to read more books like this. Then we move on to second year. Before we get into the literature side of things, I just want to talk about two short stories that I read for creative writing and really enjoyed. The first was The Lottery by Shirley Jackson, and Shirley Jackson will be making an appearance in this video again later, but I thought The Lottery was a perfectly captivating, scary short story that took a direction I didn't expect. And the other one is The Green Ribbon by Carmen Maria Machado, I believe, and I really liked this short story. Again, it was haunting, it was atmospheric, and the way that it talks about gender in this short story was very captivating to me. I've never been able to forget it, and I'm looking forward to reading her short story collection, Her Body and Other Parties, which features this short story in it. But in terms of literature and the classes I took, one of the main classes that I took was all about studying Shakespeare. And so I'm not going to tell you my favourite plays because I have a whole video where I rank all of Shakespeare's plays and I talk about them all and my thoughts and which ones were my favourites. But I just wanted to mention, you know, William Shakespeare himself, because he is one of my favourite playwrights. I think he is my favourite playwright. I've read all of his works and I enjoyed each and every one, and this class was just so fascinating because it really helped me in terms of getting the most out of the language of the plays, out of the themes and the discussions, and talking about Shakespeare, you know, a writer you love, in a group of like-minded students was absolutely a joy to me. We watched a lot of adaptations and it's truly one of the only exams I can say I've ever written and just had a blast writing the exam. It was so much fun, even if it was a little bit stressful, and yes, it was just so very good. I really enjoyed a lot of the plays that we read. Of course we didn't read all of them, but it was a very good time. And then the other literature class I took, because I took two creative, two literature, was classic crime fiction, and again I really enjoyed everything that we read for this syllabus. I'm not going to talk about some of my favourite, you know, classic crime fiction writers who I will talk about a lot more in future as I read my way through their backlist, but most of them are golden age writers. For example, I discovered Ngaio Marsh in that class and I really like her work. We got to read Agatha Christie, who I'd loved before then and still continue to love, and I was introduced to G.K. Chesterton, whose works I really liked and I'm going to be reading more of. But in terms of books I read by new to me classic authors, Lady Audley's Secret by Mary Elizabeth Braddon, and it's about this lovely lady who turns up out of the blue in a mysterious fashion to this manor, and she acts so strangely and she acts so confusingly, but she is captivating. Everybody who meets her instantly loves her and wants more of her. She's very seductive, and I also really appreciated who was the villain in this one. I feel like in classic works we don't often see this type of person get to play this villain. I'm trying to be ambiguous so I don't give anything away, but I very much enjoyed reading this one and I just had a blast that week. So again, really enjoyed this classic crime fiction, and I should try my best to read more Mary Elizabeth Braddon. And then the other one I want to pinpoint here is The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins, and this one follows this moonstone, which is this foreign object that is very much valued, and one day it gets stolen. So it's a question of who stole this moonstone, can they find it, and what led to it being stolen. And I couldn't help, because we read them quite close to each other, comparing this one to The Sign of Four by Arthur Conan Doyle, which is a Sherlock Holmes novel, and I did not like that novel at all. I absolutely hated it, and what it does with the concept of the foreign and the not UK setting, I really didn't like how it was handled. I found it to be quite racist, whereas on this hand of things, where it ended with the colonialist storyline, was just so satisfying and exactly how it should be, and I was surprised to see it in a classic novel. I expected it to go the same way as The Sign of the Four, so I found that refreshing, but I also really liked the investigators in this one and the character studies that we saw as we were trying to discover who done it. Really enjoyed it. It's quite long, but I really had a blast all the way through it. I've read another Wilkie Collins which wasn't as good, but yeah, I'll always remember The Moonstone as a very good time. Then we move on to third year, and third year was my year abroad in Australia, and I do have to say that I took quite a few classes that weren't literature, because my grades didn't count towards my degree. Mostly it just added on to my degree that I'd done a year abroad. So I took classes to do with Australian history and to do with Australian culture because I wanted to learn more. I did get to do a children's literature course, which was nice, but I didn't really love anything that we read for that course, although I got to write a very fun essay comparing the female autonomy in Twilight and the Hunger Games. But I did get to read quite a few poetry because in my poetry writing class in that year I got to kind of do my own project, create my own poetry collection, and then I had to justify some of my choices, and I decided to focus on black female poetry. While I don't have a collection to spotlight for Nikki Giovanni, I really enjoyed reading Nikki Giovanni's poetry. I just read different poems from different ones of her collections and I think she was absolutely fantastic. And secondly, I also read For Coloured Girls Who Have Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Is Enough by Ntozake, and that was one of my favourite reads of the year. It was just an absolutely amazing poetry collection. It's kind of a choreo poem, so it involves music, dance, poetry and kind of playwright style, and it encapsulates all of those things and includes it to tell different stories about these different women who are trying to live in the US, and they're all coloured women, and it's about, you know, them struggling in their relationships, them struggling in employment, just the difficulties and struggles that they have to face. And it was fantastic, and I really recommend that choreo poem poetry play mashup that it is. And I also took one class which was about the dark hero, and in fact I didn't like this class at all. I didn't like the way that it was taught, but I did read one text for it that I absolutely enjoyed, and that was Paradise Lost by John Milton, which is the story of the devil falling down from heaven and what he does to try and get revenge, and it also includes a little bit about the Garden of Eden, and it was very good. It's a epic, it's like a Christian themed epic, but it's got all of the drama, it's got all of the fights and the battles, and it's a very clear question of, you know, who is in the wrong? Is the devil actually the one who's dictating things? Is the devil actually wrong? Or are these angels just? Or are these angels a little bit hypocritical? And I really like the language in this one. Again, it kind of echoes Shakespearean language. Maybe a true literature student is screaming at me right now because we shouldn't just compare everything to Shakespearean, but I'm trying to show how it's very old. That's basically what I'm trying to say. It's old English language, and I really enjoyed reading it. It's long, it took me time, and I didn't read this version. I believe this version has punctuation in it. The version I had at the time didn't have punctuation in it, so it was a bit harder for me to read, but the fact that even though it was a difficult read I could really love it just goes to show how good it is. Then we get to my final year. So my final year was a bit different from my others because I did a lot of self-done projects. I wrote my own novel in verse. One of my courses was to make a creative writing project, so I wrote a novel in verse, and if you want to learn more about planning a novel in verse, I have a video linked down below for you. The other one was to write the beginning of a novel, so I just wrote a beginning of my Frankenstein retelling novel that I've mentioned earlier in this video. Then I took a dissertation, which is going to be discussed in a future video, so I won't be talking about that here. And then the only traditional class of literature that I took was the 20th Century US Lit class. I regret it a little bit, but there were some gems, so I'll talk about those first. So first of all, we've got The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. This absolutely blew me away, and it was not what I was expecting. It is kind of your classic horror novel where the house is haunted and they go there and it's haunted. But I also found it so interesting when we were taking it from the perspective of Eleanor, our main character, because while she's in a haunted house, she's also haunted by other aspects and other choices and experiences that she's had in her life in the past. And in fact, quite a few of these characters are. I also really like the dynamic between the characters who are in this house. It was very, you know, banterful and light and entertaining, even though we've got the serious haunting that goes on. The manner and the setting of it was absolutely creepy. It was kind of personified and made sentient, which was adding to the atmosphere all the more. And when I saw the ending coming, I just thought it was the perfect way to end this book. I really enjoyed this, and then I went on to watch the TV show, which I'd rather say is a reimagining of The Haunting of Hill House rather than a retelling of The Haunting of Hill House or an adaptation. It's definitely imagined very differently, but oh my gosh, one of the best things I've ever watched. I also read Passing by Nella Larsen, which is one of my, you know, I really love this classic. It was absolutely fantastic. It's about these two women who knew each other in the past, and they're both black, and one of them decides to grow up and pass as white and focus on living in white culture and trying to blend in and assimilate, whereas the other woman embraces her blackness and goes on to live, you know, the black experience. And when these two women meet later on in life, lots of things go down, and it's about, you know, the concept of passing, whether passing is the right thing to do and such. It's also got some queer vibes to it, which is nice to see in there. The ending is ambiguous and you can kind of take it to mean what you want it to mean. It's very short, but it packs a punch in terms of themes and discussions, even in a short novel. And then in term 2 of that class, we've got 2 plays that I really enjoyed. If you haven't noticed over the course of this video, I'm a huge fan of plays and I really enjoy them, especially when they're done well. So one of the ones that we read was A Raisin in the Sun by Lorraine Hansberry, and this is about a black family who do not have a lot of money. They kind of live in this small flat, but when a family member dies, they come into an inheritance, and it's about how all of them have different plans for this inheritance and what's really going to happen with this inheritance. And I thought it was a very, very good play. It discusses concepts of black culture, the black experience, but also about economy, class, about gender, about family dynamic, and it does all of that very, very well. It was a very balanced play. And then kind of the last assigned reading I ever did, but also what a way to go out because it was fantastic, is Angels in America by Tony Kushner. And this is a play that is about the AIDS crisis, and we follow different couples as they have different experiences during the AIDS crisis. We've got a couple where one of them is trying to pass as straight, a couple where one of them has been diagnosed by AIDS and it's looking like a dire situation, and then we also follow a man who is quite horrible, is quite homophobic, and it's about all of their stories. And it's very interesting how all of these storylines and narratives reflect each other and come into contact with each other and like weave together, but are still very distinct, but echo each other and mirror each other. And it has a lot to do with the struggles that people are experiencing during the AIDS crisis. It also touches a little bit on race, it also touches a little bit on, you know, heteronormativity, and I thought it was just fantastically done. I loved this particular scene where it used staging in such a powerful way, and I really want to see this on stage. I thought it was so good. And the last essay that I wrote was a comparison of these two works, and it was focusing on the concept of American citizenship and how American citizens are not treated equally and are denied their rights due to things such as sexuality, gender, race. And I used these 2 plays as a basis for it, and I really liked that essay as well. And there you have it. Those are some of my favourite books that I've read because of my English literature degree. I've read a lot because of it, and there are others that I really, really enjoyed, but these are my ultimate favourites. So if you had to do any reading in school, could be primary school, could be secondary school, could also be university, let me know what your favourite book was down below. Please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, hit the subscribe button if you want to see more, and don't forget to hit that notification bell to be updated every time I have a new video. And you know what they say, onwards and upwards. Excelsior!